Taanis Daf. How's everybody doing? The Gemara tells us that every single day a bas kol come out from Shemayim and say, Chanina, my son, because of him the entire world is sustained, but he himself only requires one kav of carobs. Reb Chanina's wife, she was very embarrassed from the fact that they didn't have anything and she couldn't bake chalas Erev Shabbos, so she pretended she put something in the oven just to make smoke, and she had a really bad neighbor that knocked on the door, walked right in. So she ran to the back room, but once she was there, she noticed there's a lot of bread in the oven. She said, "What are you doing in the back room?" She said, "I went to get the shovel to take out the bread." She was milumedes benisim, and therefore it wasn't a surprise to her. The Gemara tells us that Reb Chanina ben Dois's wife asked Reb Chanina, "Could you daven so we have some parnasa?" And min shamayim, they gave them a golden leg of a table. But then she dreamt that in La'asad Lav and Olam Haba, all the tzaddikim are sitting there with tables that have 3 legs, and their table only had 2 legs. So she said, we have to give it back. So Reb Chanina ben Dois and daven. And the Gemara says that the second nace, that Shemayim took the leg back, was a greater nace than the first nace. Gemara tells us Reb Chanina ben Dois' daughter was very sad. He said, "Why are you sad?" The famous Gemara. She said, "I by mistake put in vinegar instead of oil, and now it's Shabbos. I'm worried it's going to go out." So he said, the one who made the nace that causes oil to burn will make a nace that vinegar will burn. And the Gemara tells us that they used that flame for Havdalah. It lasted all the way through Shabbos. But after Havdalah, they extinguished the flame because you're not supposed to benefit from Maisa Nisim. On Shabbos they had to, but they didn't have to after Shabbos. A good neighbor of theirs came up to Reb Chanina and said, the contractor didn't do that good of a job. The beams don't go from side to side. So one pshat in the Gemara is that he davened and the beams got longer. Another pshat is that wood was added to those beams, which seems like even a greater nace. The Gemara tells us that somebody forgot his chickens by Reb Chanina ben Dois's house. So Reb Chanina ben Dois took care of them without using any of the eggs, but eventually the eggs hatched, and there were more chickens, there was too many, so he sold them, and he bought goats with them. But the neighbors came to complain that the goats are eating from their field, so he wanted to prove to the neighbors, he said, if, in fact, they did eat, the wolves will eat my goats. If not, my goats are going to hold wolves on their horns, and so it happened. Reb Elazar ben Pedas was very poor. And after doing bloodletting, where you need to eat, he didn't have any food, so he ate 1 clove of garlic, and he fainted. And Chacham came to visit him, and they saw that he's crying and laughing. Why? He saw the Rebbeinu Shalom in his dream, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him that he already lived most of his life, so he cried. But he laughed because HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, "I'll give you 13 rivers of Afar Samayim." And then Hashem flicked him on the forehead, and a spark came out of his forehead. Rav Chaim bar Chanina, and Reb Shimon ben Levi, they fasted and they said, Kama azim pnei rukia, look, chutzpahdik, that the Shemayim is not listening to us to give us clouds, the coveted tzibur. Levi, he spoke really strong to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and because of that, it rained, but he got punished. His punishment was that eventually one day when he showed Rebbe how to do a kida, how to go down, not a shtachava, but a kida, he became lame doing so. Reb Chia bar Lulani, he had a taina to the clouds. He overheard the clouds saying, "We're going to go give rain, ta'amunu moyav." So he said, "Rebbeinu Shalom, when you gave out the Torah, we accepted the Torah. Amanu moyav did not accept the Torah. Why did they deserve rain?" So in fact, it rained right there in Eretz Yisrael. We say in the pasuk, "Tzadik hatomer yifrach ke'erez balvanim yizge." On the one hand, tzaddik is compared to a palm tree. On the other hand, to a cedar tree. The Gemara tells us ketamar that they're gonna have schar la'aseh lavai, and like a cedar that when you cut it down, it keeps on growing. That it'll have olam haba. A regular cedar tree doesn't regrow. The Gemara says. So if you buy the wood of somebody's cedar tree, you can uproot the whole thing. Other arazim, you must leave a tefach because it's going to regrow. Sadan shikma, it's a sycamore. You leave 2 tefachim on the bottom, but if it was never cut before, you leave 3. If it's reeds and grapes, then you leave it from the first knot. Reb Eliezer after 13 Taanesim for rain, and it didn't rain, so people started leaving the shul, and he said to them very strongly, he said, did any of you prepare your burial place, your graves? In other words, you're all going to die. So they started crying, and that's why it started raining. Rabbi Akiva said, Avinu Malkeinu ein lanu melech el ha'ota lemancha, and then it started raining. The Gemara tells us not that Rabbi Akiva was greater than Rabbi Eliezer, but it's because Rabbi Akiva was maver al midaisav and Rabbi Eliezer wasn't. The Gemara tells us that you stop fasting when it rains, when the dirt is very tough and it saturates the dirt, 1 tefach. But if it's in between, it's not very tough, but it's not plowed, 2 tefachim. And when you have the 2 tefachim, the tahaim, the water that's 1,000 amma below the ground, goes up 3 tefachim for every tefach. And if it's plowed, then you need 3 tefachim, and the tahaim goes up 2 per tefach. The Gemara tells us that the malach in charge of this water looks similar to a calf, and it says to the lower waters, come up, and it says to the higher waters, come down, pour yourselves down. And we stop making a taanis. If it rains, either we have a 3-way machlokes, either before nets, or it rains before chatzos, or it rains before 9 hours, like by Achav. When it rains before davening, that means that Hashem's saying, I don't want to hear them. I'm not in the mood of them right now. And if it rains at the end of the day, it means that Hashem is saying, let them suffer a little bit, and then I'll give them rain. But when it's what's a good simon that HaKadosh Baruch was happy with the tzibur? When the Chazan says Mashav Ruach, and it starts blowing wind, Moed Agashem, and it starts raining. Even though you have to say Hala Gadol when you're completely full after a good meal, as it says in the pasuk Noisin Lechem L'chol Basar, our Papa said that you should say Hallel before you eat, when he was in Mechayza, because in Mechayza they were very ruggle and shichrus, they got drunk a lot, and he wanted them to say Hallel before they got drunk. And with that we finish Perek Seder Taanis Elu, Hadron Alach Seder Taanis Elu, Mazel Tov. Oh, and have a wonderful day.